I'm so excited today to have Sonia on the Arthritis Life podcast. Welcome.
Yay. Thank you, Cheryl, so much for having me on your podcast. It's such an honor.
So happy to have you. And just to give a quick introduction, can you let people know where you live and what is your relationship to arthritis and chronic illness?
Yes. So I am currently residing in San Francisco, California, and my relationship to arthritis, it's been a little over a year ago since my diagnosis with rheumatoid arthritis. And just, I would say maybe a few months ago, I was diagnosed in my hip joints with OA. And that's not, connected to RA, but another arthritis in addition
Yeah.
to RA. So that's my initial relationship. Although since being diagnosed and talking more with my family and kind of, I think, more asking questions of family medical history, I have learned that my paternal grandfather had a severe case of RA that no one seemed to communicate to any of us. And he's the only one, well, yeah, he suffered with that for a very long time. And at that time he was treated, that's when they treated RA with gold. I didn't even know that until I researched myself, like the history of RA and the treatments. And he didn't feel, at least according to my family, that it was helpful. Like it did not alleviate a lot of his pain, and apparently had a lot of chronic pain, in addition to, I think, other arthritis that was also competing pain for him too. So I guess there is a genetic, medical line, and that's to my paternal grandfather. And I'm the only one. I'm the only family member that we know of that has RA.
Wow. And
Which
similar in my family, my grandma's sister had RA, but no one else did. So my, basically great aunt, I think,
that's
had it, and that's it. So it's really interesting. And I know that, like many of us, you also have other chronic conditions. Do you mind sharing what those are, or that is?
Yes, I'm happy to. So I was going to mention, so my initial diagnosis with chronic illness has been Graves' disease. So I have Graves' disease and hyperthyroidism. In addition, I had found out, well, after that initial diagnosis, that I also have Epstein-Barr virus, which apparently at the time of my diagnosis, I think that was also what made my first thyroid storm to be so as major as it was, because that first initial thyroid storm, literally almost took my life. So I did not find that out until months after with another doctor, when I found out that I had Epstein-Barr virus. And I also learned throughout time and meeting others in the community that Epstein-Barr virus is quite common with other autoimmune diseases and disorders. There's a relationship there between Epstein-Barr and autoimmunity. So I found that very interesting. And my Graves' disease is also, there's a genetic line to my maternal grandmother. So all the women on my mother's side, at least my grandmother's generation, all of her and her sisters all have either Hashimoto's or Graves'. So my grandmother actually has Hashimoto's, and then she has another sister who has Graves', another sister who has Hashimoto's, and another sister who has Graves'. And then amongst their children, specifically daughters, it has skipped a generation. And then their daughters, if they have multiple daughters, it's skipped a generation. With my mother, she only has me. So my mom does not have, at least as of to date, she does not have a thyroid disease, but I have Graves' disease.
Wow. I mean, yeah, I think that I've had some researchers on that have been investigating, the origins of these diseases and why they occur, and so that we can hopefully develop better treatments and cures. So yeah, I'm just sorry you've had to deal with two really different kinds of chronic conditions. And I'm curious about your rheumatoid arthritis diagnosis specifically. We always cover on the Arthritis Life podcast, people's diagnosis story. So how did you get diagnosed and what were you feeling at that time?
Yeah, so I was actually coming out of a second thyroid storm. So I had a thyroid storm in fall, my second one. It was fall of 2022. And it was actually a chiropractor who actually caught that I was I was in I had a serious flare because I was going in for what I thought was a lower back issue, which it was, which I later found it was. But he was like, the inflammation is not going down given the adjustments. And he happened to have his wife also had Graves. So he was very familiar with patients who had autoimmune disorders and diseases, especially as it related to flares. He said, like, Sonia, when was the last time you had blood work? And I'm like, it's been a while. I think I should. And he goes, why don't you go in? Let's stop treatment. Go in, get tested. Sure enough, my numbers were out the roof. But this second storm felt very different from my initial one. And so, of course, when I found out the numbers, my care team responded very actively. And I had to take a short leave of absence from work. So I knew what I was dealing with. So I knew the things I needed to do in order to care for myself in a storm. And that second storm didn't require me to be hospitalized like the first one. So there were a couple of days where it was close, but I was able to mitigate. Well, it wasn't until I came out of the storm, I would say it was around Thanksgiving of that year, when then moving into the holidays, specifically after New Year's, I was like, I'm feeling new symptoms. Something isn't feeling right. I felt a lot of joint pain, a lot of hand stiffness. Like when I would wake up in the morning, like I'm a curler, like I curl like in fetal position. So I
Yeah,
curl
me too. Yeah.
like this. So when I would wake up and try to like open my hand, it was like it wasn't happening. And it was so painful. Like it was painful. And it was just in my upper extremities, like my joints in like my elbows, shoulders, specific wrists, the joints in my fingers.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, I don't feel this is related. This can't be related to thyroid. So then I contacted my
Mm-hmm.
endocrinologist and I was like, I'm not too sure if I'm going back into a storm or what this is. So I contacted my endocrinologist and my naturopathic doctor, which then they ran kind of their own set of tests. And it like started all over again, like all the tests again I had to go through. And honestly, I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I hope it's not lupus. I don't know why I was just like jumped to
Yeah.
that. I was just like, because it was like I have a whole list and like what's the top one and then all the way. It's
Mm-hmm.
terrible. It's like, and I'm like, I really hope it's not this and this. Um, and sure enough, it came back that I had RA. And then it was like the whole process of finding the right doctor. What's the treatment for this? And that's kind of
Yeah.
what introduced me to RA. And
Wow.
you,
That's yeah.
because I was
And
researching.
me.
Yeah, no, seriously, because I was for initially Googling, and then just like with my Graves, it was like I was trying to find not only resources, but also community of others to hear either stories or
Yeah.
treatment stories or like what other people are experiencing with RA. And I think it was something when I was researching on YouTube, I came across your channel and I started just watching and listening to the various things that you had posted. And then I went to your website and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I found an amazing resource and that you had a class and a community. And I'm like, okay, let me start here. So then that's how it
Wow.
started.
Wow. I mean, it's so good for me to hear that because that is exactly why I started, sharing so publicly about my own journey because I know that that's what patients often really want. I mean, there's different kinds of people, right? Some are like, just give me the textbook stuff. I'm not emotionally ready to hear like a personal story or I'm just not interested in it. But a lot of people, they want a combination of like maybe, scientific evidence and like what's the best thing to do for RA, but also what's it like to have rheumatoid arthritis? It's such a simple question, but it can have thousands of different answers.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, sorry, that's me just responding. But
Yeah.
I, want to be like a trusted guide to people, who are initially diagnosed and provide the community and support, through Room to Thrive. How soon after you got diagnosed did you join the Room to Thrive program?
I think I had missed it was
Okay.
fairly soon. I want to say within a couple months or so. And
Wow.
I think I had missed I think you had just closed for the class. So I was like, I'm going to
Oh
put it
yeah.
on my to-do list. Next time it opens, then I will register and participate. And that's pretty much what happened. And in the meantime, I was listening to your podcast, listening to other guests that you had on like the various doctors, the OTs,
Mm-hmm.
like all the folks that you had on. And then I think what was most helpful was like the gadgets, the tools, the resources,
Yeah.
those things to incorporate in one's daily life. Because what I was noticing is how much my RA was interrupting. I didn't quite understand how much it was going to interrupt like one's daily function. And
Mm-hmm.
that's sometimes it can feel, especially as someone who loves to cook and bake, when you can't hold a
Mm-hmm.
spoon or you can't stir or you can't squeeze something like with your hands. Um, it's frustrating. It feels so discouraging. Like, am I
Mm-hmm.
ever going to be able to cook or bake or do these things? You kind of feel
Yeah.
helpless. It's very debilitating. And that's another
Yeah.
thing that I had to also continue to wrap my head around too, is that autoimmune disorders and diseases are a disability and they're not
Mm-hmm.
seen, they're invisible. And I think that's the piece of navigating. I think we all navigate as people in the community because people look at me and they see something, but they're like, you're not in pain, or what do you mean? Or you look fine, or you lost all this weight. But I'm like, you don't even know the half of it. That's why it's like I never comment on people's weight or anything because you don't know if it was intentional. You don't know if it had to do with medication, or you don't know if it had to do with just the illness itself. Because I am someone who's lived through that. And so by the way, I was excited to also talk to you today because I just recently watched the I Am Celine Dion. I don't know.
Oh,
No,
that's on
I
my
don't want.
list.
Okay, then we're all I can say is it really shows, and it's not like probably Celine herself would say, I'm not the only one. And there's many of us out there. I mean,
Right,
for
right.
her in particular and what she is battling, yes, she is one of a million, because it's so rare what she is living with. But at the same, it's the
Mm-hmm.
chronic pain journey that I think many of us
Mm-hmm.
can connect to can resonate with, right? And she even says herself, this is so invisible. Like it's just so invisible. Um, and so, but
Mm-hmm.
just seeing her being so open to share that vulnerability on camera of of that experience is very, very raw because many people don't see
Mm-hmm.
that on the other end of our experiences.
100%. And I know that this is your first time sharing your story, more publicly. And that's I just want to recognize what a difficult thing that can be, it does open you up potentially to, I don't know, I'm a people pleaser. So sharing my story opens me up personally to like criticism, right? Or people saying, you didn't do a good job. You're not doing it right. You're too happy about having arthritis, or you're too sad about having arthritis, or like it's just, you're always too something for someone. And so, but I think like you've emphasized in just what you were just saying, that the vital importance of having stories to access,
Mhm.
is for newly diagnosed people in particular, is so it's for me, that's what motivates me to share, despite my inherent personality, like fear of anyone, you know, not liking me, quote unquote, or disagreeing
Mhm.
or commenting.
Mhm.
You're like, okay, well, this is important. It's important, and I know that some negativity may come from this, but the positive outweighs the negative. That's how I think of it. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've learned is just we're all in this human experience. And who are we to judge that or to comment on it, right? Because and I'm also I've learned through this journey with having chronic illness is that I can't compare my experience to another person because and you say this is something that you definitely remind those who are in the Room to Thrive community, that we have to speak from our own experience. And I remind people every time this and you say to people, this is what has worked for me. I'm sharing this because maybe you want to try it and maybe it won't work. Just like medications, not every medication is going to work, even though like I know realistically the medication I'm on currently on for RA, it's working for the time being, and I hope it'll continue to work as long as it can. But I also know the reality that it may stop working at some point, and I'm going to have to make a shift and change because that's just the trajectory of having RA. And I know that's the reality that
Mm-hmm.
we live with. And I'm okay. I've accepted that. I'm no longer like, like I've just like, yeah, I've accepted that.
Well, that's huge. I mean, acceptance is so difficult, it, but so vital. And you touched on actually what was going to be my next question, which is, whatever you feel comfortable sharing about your treatment story, because a lot of
Mhm.
people, again, are just, they want to know, what might it look like. And you're so right. My treatment journey, Cheryl, is going to be different than yours or someone else's. But anyway, with all those caveats, what has your treatment journey been like over the last year and a half? I guess year and a half, yeah, a little over a
Mhm.
year.
Yeah, as it pertained to RA, I kind of went down a rabbit hole. You're like, oh, what are the medications? And then I got so overwhelmed because there's so many. And then I was like, what's
Mm-hmm.
the least invasive? Because I'm also someone who's very sensitive to Western medication. So
Mm-hmm.
even what I chose, even how I chose to treat my Graves' disease may not be, especially for Western doctors, they may not have chosen that for me. But I've also done my research and I also know my body and know that, yeah, certain things may not work for me and I'm not willing to try that yet. And so
Mm-hmm.
for RA in particular, because I got so overwhelmed at the beginning, I did kind of lean into my naturopath doctor and was just like, I'm really, because I have incorporated so much holistic modalities and remedies into my care as well. Not only just Western
Mm-hmm.
medicine, I've paired the two together because I have seen results. I have been able to
Mm-hmm.
reverse my symptoms. Obviously, what the two things that I hold, there's no cure for them, at least not as of yet. And
Mm-hmm.
but I do have to some extent some control. Like I have control of what foods do I put in my body, right? What products
Mm-hmm.
do I consume? Right? Whether it's over the counter medications that maybe are going to be harsher on my gut and my autoimmunity versus ones that are not. So, I have incorporated an
Anti-inflammatory
anti-inflammatory
diet.
diet. So, meaning no soy, no dairy, no gluten. And the two
Mm-hmm.
probably most triggering ones for me is soy and gluten. Um, Especially soy. And I was a vegetarian for 10
Mm-hmm.
years prior to my diagnosis. So tofu was my
Oh,
main resource of protein. So I'm like, what now? What do I do now? And so I went through a whole thing with that and then had to slowly transition back to meat. That's a whole other story. And
yeah.
that was a
Wow.
process under medical care and to do that so I wouldn't get sick because I was a vegetarian for as long as I had been. And so, like, I take enzymes for that's kind of how it started,
Mm-hmm.
taking digestive enzymes to help ease and to break down like the proteins
Right.
because there were certain foods that my gut wasn't breaking down appropriately. So I think changing the diet a lot was a huge thing. I went into a huge detox. Like I detoxed at the beginning, but in particular so that I think helped me with RA, um, is
Mm-hmm.
that piece. The initial medication that I actually started on was suggested by my naturopath, and that was naltrexone.
Oh, yeah. That's a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, right?
Correct. And
Yeah.
they recommend
Yeah.
for RA low dosage and this was coming from a
Mm-hmm.
compound pharmacy at low dosage. So
Yeah.
my dosage wasn't even at the level of what they use this medication for what they treat.
I see. But yeah, it definitely is approved just as a drug. It's just not necessarily
Correct.
like the first line
For
typically used,
RA.
for RA. And I'll always put the caveat in here that nothing that you hear on this podcast. This is in the medical disclaimer on every episode, but I should probably remind people more that we're never giving medical advice. We're giving personal stories because I firmly believe in the wealth of research. And those who've heard my story, like word vomited a million times, I've been on the aggressive Western medicine route from the very beginning, and that's what's worked for me. But there are many different paths, and I like a core value for me is respecting each person's journey and respecting how they got to the outcomes that work for them, right? So sorry, I'm on my little soapbox. This is your
No,
time
and
to
I
share your story, but
appreciate you saying that,
yeah,
Cheryl, because that's important to be
yeah.
said. Yeah, and the medication
Mm-hmm.
wasn't working. I was finding myself kind of going through up and down flares. So I would have like a small flare, and then it would even out, and then I'd have a really big flare, and then it would kind of plateau, and then another big flare. It was too much up and down with regards to my flaring. And I was like, I came to terms with, okay, this is not working, even though I so wanted it to work for me. So, and that also
Yeah,
came with
yeah.
finding the right doctor. So, like the rheumatologist who I was with, he was really against me taking that initial medication, even though I literally brought the clinical trial, like I brought a manila folder with everything. And he just shut it down. He wouldn't even look at it. He even asked him, like, I made copies for you.
Mm,
Can you at least take this into consideration? Because if he at least approved it, my insurance would cover it rather than me paying out of pocket to try this medication, which I ended up doing. So I ended up paying out of pocket for a medication that cost me a little
mm,
under $100, but still, I was paying that out
yeah,
of pocket. But it was for me, I at least wanted to say I tried. It didn't work. I moved
yeah.
on. So I've been taking
Mm-hmm.
now currently since then. And I was only on that medication, I want to say it was like 6 months. So it wasn't very long, because I was
Mm-hmm.
told I would know within that time frame whether the medication would really take or not. And it wasn't. So then I went on
Mm-hmm.
hydrochloroquine. So I've been on low
Mm-hmm.
dose, and I've seen a lot of results from it.
Hydroxychloroquine. Yeah.
Hydroxychloroquine. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Some of these
I know. It's
medications
impossible
are
to
like,
remember. No, I, I'm only saying it for the record. And,
thank you, Cheryl.
I'm always like, yeah. Well, and that actually directly, the thing with rheumatoid arthritis medications is that the ones that are specifically targeted to slow down disease progression are the ones like the conventional disease modifying antirheumatics like hydroxychloroquine, methotrexate, plaquenil, sulfasalazine, and then the biologic DMARDs, disease modifying antirheumatic. And I am going to put in the comment or the comments in the show notes a link to the American College of Rheumatology treatment guidelines for rheumatoid arthritis. It is written for doctors, but it's a guideline that's updated every 5 years typically, and it has lots of links to helpful research. I'll also put an outside link to one of the low dose naltrexone, because I've definitely been hearing more and more about that. And you're right, there is peer reviewed research that can be helpful, but an anti-inflammatory is not necessarily, from my understanding, going to alter the immune process, right? It's altering the effect of the immune process, which is
Correct.
inflammation. But the disease modifying ones are trying to kind of stop it before it starts. But like, and you're saying it was your right and your, to try that if that's your bodily autonomy, right? Like if that's what you felt comfortable with, that's what you needed to do.
And I forgot to preface early on when you had asked me about my initial diagnosis. I think it's also important to note that I was diagnosed with in early stages of RA. So I'm at early stage of RA. I don't have like I've been caught it in a good amount of time. Hence probably why this medication is supporting me at the moment, because my RA hasn't like progressed. So it's not like it's progressively like getting more severe. So, which, I know that it can change throughout time. So I will say that.
That's a perfect example of no two people are the same, right? Because you might have somebody who presented with, oh, I just got diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, but I've had progressive joint pain, joint deformities over 3 years. That person, you're going to need to probably, or typically, again, I'm not a doctor, but the clinical guidelines, state you're going to be a little more aggressive in those cases typically versus, the early stages. So, and I know that, medications are one part of a treatment plan. And like you said, you're really, and it's funny because I think San Francisco is kind of, sorry, I'm like interrupting my thought process, but San Francisco is like a part of the country that has so much holistic and like complementary services and complementary doctors, meaning I always have to say a complementary because it's like you can take Western medicine and along with that, you can be a naturopath and you can try, yoga. And I know there's a kind of shorthand joke, quote unquote, in the rheumatoid arthritis social media community, like, oh, just try yoga. But I know in your case, yoga it's not just try yoga, right? It's actually part of so okay, I'll just let you share. What have you done, for your treatment that's outside of the medications as well?
Yeah, so with my naturopath, I'm on a supplemental protocol, which is fairly long, but what I won't go in detail as to each of the supplements, but what I can say is it's making my immune system stronger and guarding it at the same time, I guess is the best way to just say is what my supplemental protocol is amongst my supplements. And and also my doctors are aware of what I take, like my Western doctors as well, and they are, in support of it as well. There's nothing that I'm taking um, that's of concern. Um, so yoga came into my field during my recovery after my first storm. So I couldn't physically work for a good almost a half a year, if not a little longer than that, because I had lost so much weight in such a short, in a 3.5 month period, and muscle mass. So I had a lot of atrophy, and I was in a lot of fatigue still. And so I felt like, what can I do to move my body that felt gentle, that could rebuild my stamina and kind of start slowly rebuilding my muscle? And the thing that I remembered was yoga, because I used to practice it back in grad school. And I remember, and I did it just for like as a stress reliever. And that's what it does do. It supports. And so I kind of went back into practice, but I was noticing so much more that the practice was doing for me. So it wasn't just the physical aspects of the movement, but it was more on a soul level. It was more on like a spiritual body, mental like experience that I was having, because there was so much loss since my initial diagnosis, all the way to also my RA, just so much loss in life as far as what was physically happening to me and also just around me in my life. And so yoga was being on the mat, being in a movement, being in certain poses was also a release. Like there are moments when I would just cry, like just bawl out cry, because sometimes my body was doing something where it hadn't been able to move that way or do that. And it was like I was in full embodiment. So I think my tears came from either something that needed to be released that I was holding on to, or out of pure joy that my body was moving in a way it hadn't moved in so long. And it was that reminder to me of how strong our bodies are and resilient they can be after going through such a drastic storm, and also can continue, as many of us, we just don't have, unfortunately, just one chronic illness. As I've learned being a part of the Room to Thrive community, so many of us have more than two we're like living with on a daily basis. And that brings all sorts of different symptoms along with that. And so that's where yoga, honestly, Cheryl, saved my life. And it also saved my life in ways on I think a mental health level, that when you're experiencing chronic illness, there are moments of helplessness, at least for me. There are moments like, is this going to get any better? Am I going to get any better? Am I going to be strong enough to get through this? And then sometimes moments where you just like, I just want to sometimes just give up and just like let go and see what happens. And it's there is a song that I so connected with throughout this journey. As you probably know her, Avril Lavigne, who had
Oh,
lupus,
yes.
her song Above
Yeah.
Water. When I first heard it, I just listened to the lyrics, but when I saw the video, the metaphors in the video with the lyrics hit me. And
Yeah.
it so resonated so strongly, I think, with so many of us who go through the various symptoms of chronic illness, that it felt like I would do practice to that song. Music then became a
Mhm.
source of healing, being on my mat in movement. There were particular artists that just was all healing to me, like Florence and the Machine, Avril
Oh,
Lavigne, Dermot Kennedy. There were all these people that
yeah.
I would practice to, that were just like, were a release, but also a source of empowerment for me to like stand in my power in certain
Yes.
poses, Like warrior three became like my pose. And like certain poses that I would do
I
was
love.
just my movement. Even when I would go to classes, even the teachers started noticing this is Sonia's pose because they would see a difference, I
Yeah.
think, in my body in a particular pose, right? And I could really feel it and really embody where I'm at and all the ups and all the like ebbs and flows of that of the ocean, of the water. And sometimes I've also
Mhm.
realized sometimes just being in Shavasana, just being in corpse pose is really all you need to be, is just to be held right by the earth. And sometimes
Mhm.
that's the only pose that is there for you in that moment. And that is okay
Yeah.
if that's where you're at. So I felt like yoga and the wisdom of yoga taught me to be in all the unknown. To I'm still working on like the impermanence is I think the piece that is a daily practice for me in like acceptance.
I wanted to make sure to ask on a practical level. There are so many different types of yoga. There's hot yoga. There's the yoga at your local YMCA versus the yoga maybe at like a different philosophy kind. So can you, such a weird way, anyway, I'm judging myself for how I asked this question, but can you let us know like what was your entry level,
Mhm.
into yoga, and is there a name for the type that you practice?
Yes, it was hatha. So hatha is more gentle. It's more of a gentle style of
Mm-hmm.
yoga. And then, but the yoga that I got trained under as for my teacher certification is vinyasa, which is more dynamic. So it's like ongoing movement from like up down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Vinyasa can also have moments of gentleness as well, depending on like how it's put together, the movements. But I would say I flow between hatha and yin yoga. Yin yoga is also known for gentle. Um, and then vinyasa generally is known for more dynamic, ongoing movement in the flow,
Mm-hmm.
which lately has been for me since RA has been challenging because it's hard for me to go from up down or to do certain things in a combination can be a struggle. So I have been judging myself a lot just in my practice. Like I've been on a hiatus from teaching
Oh.
because I have been in my own head in my practice. And I think this is where, especially here in the West, yoga is seen as a particular body type, or like to be able to do a
Mm-hmm.
handstand, or to be able to be in like crow pose. Like it's what you see on
Mm-hmm.
Instagram or what you see and that's not yoga. Yoga is
Right, right.
being an embodiment with your body, right? It's the
Yeah.
wisdom. Another teacher had reminded me when I was kind of sharing with her some discouragement that I was feeling. And she was like, "You are practicing yoga, Sonia. Right now, you are in that practice because what you're conflicted by, that is the wisdom of the teaching and what it's teaching you, and that it's okay to be where you're
Wow.
at, right? It's okay to modify. It's okay to have props. I mean, props are there for a reason. It doesn't say anything less about you in your practice, or even those of us who are yoga teachers, that, props are there for a reason, and it's to support us,
Yeah.
right? Just like gadgets and tools that we use, right, to support us,
Mm-hmm.
they're there for purpose. And so I think it's kind of us just kind of letting go of, and me letting go of, oh, yoga's supposed to look a certain way or to be a certain way or to, wear a certain pant. That's not yoga at all. It's
Mm-hmm.
that you can do yoga at any size. You can do yoga whether, in a wheelchair, you can do yoga in a chair, you can do
Yeah.
yoga laying down on the floor. You can do yoga in your bed.
Yeah.
You don't have to do yoga in the way of like being on a mat, being able to stand, going to a seated position. It's so much
Yeah.
more than that.
Yeah, I really loved I had definitely Dr. Stephanie Monaz. She is a yoga teacher and author of Yoga for Arthritis, which is like a website and a series of videos. And she defined yoga as a philosophy, not an exercise. And
Yes.
she said yoga means the union of body and mind through movement, breath, and mindfulness. And I was like, whoa, that is so much deeper than I thought yoga was, And I think the same issue, I often say the difficulty with acceptance-based practices for people in pain is that the last thing you want to do when you're feeling pain is connect to your body. Like that's a very unintuitive, right? You feel like my ancestors did not probably be like, I'm in pain. Let me sit here and connect to it. Like they probably were like, let's fix this, right? Or maybe evolutionarily, I'm thinking like an evolutionary perspective. It's not adaptive at face value to be like, I'm going to sit with the present moment. You're like, no, I need to do something. Like pain activates me to try to solve something, the problem of pain, right? But then it ends up completely backfiring, right? Because you
Yes.
then become disconnected from your body. And sorry, I'm just going on my own little tangent, but what would you say to somebody who's like, I don't want to just be like, you were saying it, yoga taught you how to just be like, that's uncomfortable. How,
And this is a great question because I feel like it's a very present one for me, like in the present
oh,
moment.
yeah.
Um, because I know like being in downward dog is painful for my wrists in particular. Like I can't be like this on my wrists. Um, I and so I'm learning myself modifications that work for me that doesn't that where I'm not feeling that pressure on certain joints where I do feel it or they don't feel as strong as they did. Um, it still surprises me that I went through a 200-hour yoga teacher training not that long ago that I didn't at the time, felt anything, at least at that time, to where I'm at today, where being like on hands and knees, like I have to be in soft fists. So it's softer on my wrists rather than flat on my hands. And then there are just some positions where I've accepted I cannot do because of because I feel pain. And so I don't do those positions. I choose not to do those positions. And that's okay. Like I've had to tell myself, Sonia, that doesn't say anything less about you in your practice or even as a teacher. In fact, if anything, I think that is what we should be teaching is that if all poses are an invitation. No one should feel like they to go into a pose that is going to incite physical pain. It's all an invitation, all of what one teaches. And it's also okay to not do a pose, to skip it, or to modify or do a pose that does feel good to you, even if the whole class is not doing that pose. I don't care if someone's going to look at me. This pose right now is what's speaking to me, and this is the pose that makes me feel good in my body without like worrying about how others may judge me or she's not following with the rest of the class. The fact that I'm just showing up is a big step.
That is beautiful. And can you hear an echo of me? That's such a beautiful sentiment. And I think one of the things you said to me before when we were preparing for this podcast recording, you said one of the things you are most passionate about sharing is about how your chronic illness and healing journey has been a liberating one, which I'm very fascinated by that concept. Can you tell me what do you mean by that? How has it been liberating?
So there is a doctor who I got introduced to. I'm trying to remember how I learned about Dr. Gabor Mate. I think it was through his book, and then I saw him somewhere
Yeah.
else speaking, and then I learned about his film, The Wisdom of Trauma. There is a
Mm-hmm.
quote that he said that like was an aha moment for me. Was that, and I'll read it. Trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside of you as a result of what happened to you. I felt like that gave me it shifted my perspective of trauma. And I'm talking in like any trauma that one experiences, right? Medical, I think this applies to all trauma. And I think he's speaking to like all trauma with regards to whether it's medical trauma or other forms of trauma that folks may encounter in their lifetime. And as someone who comes from a family with various traumas, and as someone who later in life, as an adult, has experienced medical trauma, that it has helped me gain perspective as far as I think that so much of it's taking me this long to like, and therapy to like be like to this point of like, oh, to like connect it for myself is that trauma doesn't define who we are as an actual person, an individual. It doesn't define us, right? Um, but it's what happens inside of us, right? As a result of that trauma, especially if you experience trauma as a child, like I did, especially during fundamental periods of one child's lifetime. And I think that's something that another book has taught me, A Body Keeps the Score, where it talks about that in particular, where trauma can have an imprint on someone, which can impact one's autoimmunity, depending on one's trauma, right? And fight or flight. Were you a child who were able to process one's fears, one's sadness, right? Did you understand an outlet for that? And so it's like, because I know I live in fight or flight, and that is can be triggering to my nervous system. It is triggering to my nervous
Yeah.
system. So in order to, I know that for myself, I need to have and know like what are my resources to help me um, be able to care for my nervous system, right? What are the tools and resources to care for my nervous system, which then will care for my autoimmune system and not trigger
Yeah.
other things inside of me, which can happen for me. I think that a big part of my second flare, my second thyroid storm that happened was due to I did have a lower back issue that was happening that was causing me discomfort at night where I couldn't sleep. So I wasn't getting enough sleep. So then it was causing stress during the day because I didn't have the appropriate amount of sleep. So it was a combination of not being able to sleep, then it triggers another piece, which is stress, and it's like the perfect storm. It's like creating like the perfect storm in my nervous system and autoimmune system. And it's all interconnected, right? They're all talking to each other. And so I feel like really then getting down to understanding that on a deeper like soul level is also another journey that I've gone through, that being in therapy and talk therapy and engaging myself in other realms, other communities of healing as well, that I've also allowed myself to be open to in order to heal any wounds that have gone unhealed, right? Of just not either not knowing or not knowing even how to heal that, right? I think his work, Dr. Mate's work, is really powerful. That film, The Wisdom of Trauma, is so powerful. There was another documentary that I also watched called Heal, which also was another one that was very powerful to show various kind of modalities of healing and how we all can take part of our own healing, right? To a certain extent. Obviously, those of us who have a particular, we can only control so much of our disease and disorders. And then there's other pieces where we can play a role in that too. And it's not always easy. It's not always, it's messy. It's a messy process too, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen that picture where they're like, healing is not linear and it's just like a linear line. Healing looks like this.
Yes, yes.
Right? And it's the squiggly, it's
line.
like,
I love that.
it's just like, it's messy. And I have felt that messiness. It can be just so messy. And I think that's the liberatory part of it, is also like embracing my imperfections. Like this, I'm an imperfect person and I'm chronically fabulous. That's kind of, it's like changing my perspective of things and also finding ways to have humor. I created a board on Pinterest of like trying to find humor in chronic illness has also been something that's been liberating too. And because it's just at some point it's like I need to cultivate areas of joy and happiness, and where are those little moments for me? Because it can get really dark, but like sometimes I don't want to, it's hard to just stay there, because there have been moments where I have stayed there. And and sometimes I also allow myself, okay, I'm feeling this, let's feel it. And like I've worked in rituals, like scream rituals. I've gone into the forest and just screamed. And that was hard, Cheryl. When someone first suggested that to me, I'm like, I don't know if I can do that. That's going to be really hard. And then a friend of mine said, why don't you journal? Start journaling first and then see what comes of that. So then I was like journaling just words, like how I was feeling, how this moment I was feeling. And then I just started, and it was around the like, can someone hear me? Is someone going to hear me? If someone's on a hike, are they going to think I'm okay? Like I just had all these things. And I'm like, Sonia, you're deep in the forest. Who is going to hear you? You're by yourself. You're in the forest. Just let it go. Like just. And then, at first it started very quiet. And then it just like, it got louder and it got louder. And then it got louder. And then tears started coming. And then it got louder and more tears. And then, I had to do it a few more times where I took myself up to the forest and just like, and it felt so like it felt like a huge weight off my shoulder of just like releasing that. Because I feel like culturally in my culture and even in my family, you like aren't, there's no outlet for like anger or for disappointment or even for sadness. Even to just emote sadness, there was a threat behind that. Like if I cried, then they'd be like, why, what are you crying for? And it's because I'm feeling this way. Well, it was as if sadness had to be connected to harm or like being hurt.
Justified.
There you go. Exactly. Whereas, it was like, I didn't know, you don't know what to do with that. Like if you're not taught to process your feelings as a child, then what do you do? Then how do we project that in our adult selves? So having to like connect with my inner child, doing like that work, even though it was painful till today, it still is painful to process. A lot of times we don't want to be with our feelings.
Yeah. And it leads directly, I think, into the power of community. Like you said earlier,
Yes.
in Room to Thrive, I honestly think sometimes, I had all these lofty goals when creating the program. And what has ended up being so impactful for people is even more simple than I had originally imagined, right? But it's literally sitting in a virtual room with people who are going through something similar and giving yourself and others permission to feel what you're feeling about it. Like, it's so simple, right? But so I think it's almost a universal experience that everyone that's come to the groups on some level feels like they're doing it wrong, or that they're missing something obvious, or they've had some, almost everyone has had some experience of that real negative self-judgment. And it's so, when we get in a group with others, it's almost universal that we're so much more patient and forgiving to others than we are to ourselves. So even just helping someone else in the group sometimes is even more healing than someone helping you. Does that resonate at all?
For sure. Yeah, hands down. I think also, Cheryl, and I don't know if I've said this directly to you yet. Well, now I will. And I think for me, what the group has provided is courage. The courage to be able to be vulnerable, like, and to just be my full authentic self and vulnerable, as well as practicing some boundaries, like saying, I'm just needing you all to just listen, um, without any kind of, I mean, I've never felt any kind of judgment in the space whatsoever, but like not looking for, um, like, oh, have you tried this? Or have you tried that? Like that does, but if someone's feeling like they need to just like say a boundary, like for me, that's learning to acknowledge and say boundaries to folks.
Mm-hmm.
This is like the starting ground for me, because if I can do it here, then I can do it with my family and I can do it with my friends, which is helped me being in other healing circles and spaces like Room to Thrive, where I've been able to practice that, to then practice in other aspects of my life, like with my family, with friends. Like, I'm not looking for any kind of feedback or any kind of like suggestions. I just need to just someone to just listen. Um, and that
Yeah.
I feel is what the space has provided. Um, and also like everyone's having their own experience, right? And so we're all being witnessed and having our own experience without judgment, right? And I think that's very powerful and it's very healing.
Yeah. It's so, it really is. And I'm not actually a particularly spiritual person, but it does feel sacred to me. Like, that's the only word
Mhm.
that keeps getting through
Agreed.
my head. It is.
Agreed.
It's a, it's such a, especially, I think, I spend so much of my time online or in technology, which has been amazing. I mean, listening to this podcast or watching the video of it, it's all because of technology that this is all able to happen. But sometimes
Mhm.
it's like everything, I feel I'm rushing through my life sometimes, and then when we
Mhm.
stop and we have a live experience, like in the support group, like, this is what we're doing. I'm not multitasking right now. I'm allowing myself to focus fully in the moment on witnessing and listening to other people's experiences. And when they ask for it, it is, in the Room to Thrive groups, it is okay to say, I'm actually
Right.
looking for answers or solutions. Like, hey, I'm having some methotrexate fatigue the day after. Does anyone have any specific pointers? Of course, but it's also, like you said, okay to say, hey, I just want to vent, or I just want to share, and I'm not looking for responses. I think that's, like you said, it's very hard to just go from asserting a boundary in your head to asserting it through the person that's like most difficult person to do it with, like a family member or a workplace environment. So just first practice it in a safe environment.
Right.
Makes perfect sense. I actually, honestly, I didn't think of it exactly in those terms until you said that. So I'm really appreciate that you said that.
Well, it's also my first time being also in a support group. Well, especially pertaining to like those of us who have a medical condition, right? So kind of support group environment. So I also didn't go into the group, let alone even what in the class, I expected I was going to learn more information about RA. But as far as like the supportive group dynamic and aspect of it, I just kind of went in with no expectations because I really didn't know. I didn't know what to expect rather than just I knew I would hear stories of other people's lived experiences, and I was just very open to listening. And I wasn't quite, I knew at some point I'd feel courage to share. But it was more like, you get comfortable with everyone in the space. And after hearing other people's stories and sharing their vulnerabilities, gives you courage and it empowers you to be like, okay, I'm just gonna just gonna be courageous and then just share and just not worry about how I say it or how I say it and just say it.
Yeah. It's so interesting the number of people who've said that, that their goal in the beginning was to, and that's 100% valid, but to initially like sit back and digest what is being said and not share, and then by the end the comfort level increases so much, like you said, that it makes it a lot easier. I always am appreciative of the people who I'm appreciative of everyone in the group too, whether you share and whether you don't. There's people who they like to listen and maybe respond in the chat, or just simply be there to listen, and that's 100% okay too. And the only other thing I wanted to say, because you mentioned humor, and I made sure to put a pin in that in my head, that's also been one of the most pleasantly surprising things about the Room to 5 groups, and it depends on the group. It's always a little bit of it's a co-created experience, right, by the individuals, the energy, the personality, the preferences. But some groups more than others, but humor always plays a role, and at least has always played a role in at least one person's journey. Or we always end up laughing more than I think most people would think you would laugh in a support group, right? A chronic illness support group. So I think humor for me is a really important tool in my coping toolbox. And I even put that in the self-paced course part of the program, where it's under coping tools. Humor is one of them for many people. It's very it's part of embracing joy and choosing to see some light in the darkness as well. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, I think I had mentioned once in group, I think I had posed a question. Has anyone else found themselves clumsier since their diagnosis?
Oh, yeah.
And everyone laughed and was just like, definitely, for sure. I'm like, okay, I'm so glad I'm not alone, because that's one thing I'm just like constant. And I now I just laugh about it, because I'm constantly making messes, dropping things, unable to open something. And then when I get it open, it goes everywhere. And yeah, it's just, I don't know. I just have noticed I'm just a lot more clumsier.
Yeah. And it's fun to share our fails. We have to share your wins, fails, vents, questions, so, but yeah, I think I have a little working theory about that you have these little sensory nerves around your joints and connective tissue, like around your muscle tendons and such, called proprioceptors. And your proprioceptors give information to your brain about where your body parts are in space. So if you close your eyes and touch your nose, how did you know to touch your nose without looking? It's because you have this map in your brain of where your body parts are in space. And because these are located, a lot of them are in the joints. It's like your brain has these little, these little dots that you've ever seen people animate, 3D animation. That's how they do it, right? So when you've had damage to the joints, it's only kind of logical to think that maybe the damage to the joints and inflammation is interrupting that proprioception process. So your brain may be getting less information about where your body parts are in space and making it more difficult to move around. So that's my theory. That's my occupation.
That's a really good theory, though, and it makes sense.
Yeah, but so every time I drop something, I'm thinking, oh, it's my proprioception's not quite what it used to be. But yeah, and it's being able to laugh, it makes you feel human again too. When you've been in like a dark place. But I am very aware, again, because I get so much feedback on social media when I post things, that for some people they don't find it helpful to at least look at other people's humorous takes on living with rheumatoid arthritis, and that's okay too. Like one of my little mantras is like, I can't be all things to everyone. Like, some people are going to be turned off by it. Like, it's not funny. Why are you trying to make it look like it's a cute little funny disease? And I'm like, it definitely is not. And one of my ways of responding to criticism is defensiveness. So one of those, I'm self-aware that like I tend to get defensive. So being a social media influencer of sorts, I identify myself as like a patient educator using the power of social media, right? My goal is to educate and support people, and I can do it through the power of social media. My goal isn't just to like be an influencer, like, look at me, I'm so pretty, like this is how I do my nails or whatever, but it's been a lesson for me, or it's been an area where I can practice not not defaulting to defensiveness.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and I think that for me, like you said, Cheryl, humor has been a source of coping for me. And it's not even about making fun of myself. It's about just having some lightheartedness around what I'm experiencing. Because what I don't want to hold is just feeling negative. Even though I allow myself to feel that if I'm in that space, but it's not a feeling that I just want to hold on to every day. Because then I'm not allowing any space for joy or even to cultivate some glimmer of happiness. Because I mean, I see that with that you could just stay in that dark place. And at least for me, I'm speaking for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. It has been, it's very, I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from others. I know there's a lot of people about using humor. So I think you're definitely not alone.
Yeah, my mantra, since you shared yours, I always say my body is my temple. And I also give gratitude every morning when I wake up. I give gratitude every morning to my body. Sometimes certain parts of my body, like my heart, because my heart has gone through so much, especially as it relates to my thyroid. Because I have a heart condition now because of my first storm initially, but I've now stormed twice, and the doctors are like, every time you storm, your heart takes a hit so I just I put my hands on my heart, and I always give my heart gratitude. First thing in the morning, give gratitude in general to my body. And sometimes I just acknowledge parts of my body that have had experienced pain, and just thank you for being here with me. Thank you for us waking up. Thank you for another day.
I love that. Well, you've anticipated, and my next set of questions are what I call the rapid fire questions as we start kind of coming to the end. But in addition to, do you have a favorite? You mentioned your favorite mantras. Do you have or what are some of your words of wisdom to somebody listening who might be newly diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis or a similar condition?
Have grace and ease with yourself. I wish that was something told to me because I didn't have much
Mm.
grace with myself. Um, and it took some practice for me to just have grace when I would think certain thoughts that were like negative, what I would call negative self-talk, like to myself.
Mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
like you wouldn't talk to a child. Like if it were my young self
Yeah.
next to me, I wouldn't be saying to that younger Sonia all the things that I was saying to myself and in my adult self. So, having that grace and having some self-forgiveness for myself, even when those thoughts do enter, because we're human, it's going to happen. Um, and so I think that, and it's sometimes I continue to remind myself, and I have others around me who I ask to also, when I need that reminder. I do have friends who are just like, Sonia, have grace and ease with yourself. And then I'm like, yes. Um,
Yeah.
how
That's
would
beautiful.
yeah, how would I speak to my young self?
Yeah. I love that. I also work on that a lot. Do you have a favorite arthritis gadget or tool in your toolbox, physical or metaphorical?
I just learned a new one, and probably it's not going to be new to you, Cheryl, but I just learned just recently myself. Um, I didn't know anything about ring splints. Like
Oh, yes.
they're now making like fashionable looking ring splits, like it looks like an
Mm-hmm.
accessory. So I just recently ordered a couple, and I'm waiting for them to come and to try them out because I have noticed recently one of my on my right hand, my dominant hand, my finger, this finger here, it's slightly starting to bend. It's a very slight
Mm-hmm.
bend.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually my naturopath doctor who noticed it when she was looking, when she had me put my hands
Mm-hmm.
down. And she goes, "Did your doctor mention that in your last checkup?" And I'm like, "Actually, he didn't." And I go, "I had been noticing it too, but I was like, am I being too hyper vigilant or, I'm like, am I,
Yeah.
and then
So
she goes,
hard.
"No,
Yeah.
it is slightly starting, bending in one way." But she goes, "I can tell you something you can get to help that." And then she told me about ring splints. And I'm like, huh? And then she goes, "Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
they're making like they look more like accessories, like a ring, but it's there with a purpose."
Yeah.
And then she showed me, and I was
Yeah.
like, "I need to get me one." So I
They're
got one
so
for
great.
that finger. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can have, if you want a really customized experience, you can,
Hmm.
especially if your insurance covers it. I think it's a good idea to go to a certified hand therapist because they can assess
Oh,
your
okay.
hands, measure you. Yeah, this is kind of just for anyone listening. A certified hand therapist is usually an occupational therapist, but sometimes a physical therapist that's done additional training and expertise and passed a board exam all about the hand. They're just like wizards with understanding. There's so many muscles that go into the hand. There's muscles that are called intrinsic muscles that originate and end in the hand, and then there's the extrinsic ones that start up by the elbow and go into the. I mean, the hand is just incredibly complex. There's 9 carpal bones in your wrist, and then there's all the little tiny bones that go into your fingers. So they are a godsend for many people. I mean, I'm an occupational therapist, but I'm not a certified hand therapist because I didn't do all that additional training. And they can measure and see because there's different kinds of, quote unquote, deformities that you could have with RA or just generally. There's like boutonniere's deformity or like swan neck, or there's hypermobility. Ring splints are usually used for like hypermobility to keep your joints from getting out of place, but they can definitely also kind of nudge your joints away from an ulnar drift type deformity as
I
well.
will definitely talk to my doctor, my next follow-up about that.
Ask your doctor if a certified hand therapist is right for you. It's all those drug commercials. Ask your doctor if you have moderate to severe rheumatoid arthritis. Yeah. My husband was like one day, my husband was like, "Do you have moderate to severe?" I'm like, "Actually, technically, yes." Like that was my diagnosis. I asked my doctor once. I was like, "Is my," because I know I was diagnosed with like moderate to severe rheumatoid arthritis when I was first diagnosed. But I was like, "But since I've been controlled and, for with
Mm-hmm.
medications at times. She's like, it's still kind of, that's your diagnosis, that
Mm-hmm.
follows you. So I'm like, I guess they're talking to me.
Mm-hmm.
Moderate to severe. They never do the mild to moderate. You don't get any commercials. It's always moderate. So you're out of luck. No, okay, sorry. That's humor again. Other
Other,
question. Do you have a
uh,
favorite? Yeah. Oh, we're gonna say another gadget. Sorry, I just got off on ring splints.
yeah, no, I think my other favorite things that I use are like my pillows. So like I have a knee pillow for
Mm-hmm.
sleeping, and some other supportive pillows that I use if I'm sitting, if I'm going to be stationary. And then also the compression gloves and sleeves I've found that have been very useful. And then the variety of kitchen gadgets, and I'm always looking for new ones. Um,
Oh yeah, yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah, and yeah, when you mentioned circling back to you mentioned cooking earlier, and that's really really hard if you're having a lot of hand pain.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, awesome. Do you have a favorite book or movie or show you have watched recently?
I would say my favorite book that I like love and I've read it more than once um is Between Between Two Kingdoms, a memoir of a
Okay.
life interrupted, by
Oh
Saleka.
yeah.
By Saleka, yeah.
Okay, I've heard of this.
One. Yeah, I've read that book, I think now 3 times. I love
Wow.
that book. I go in, well, the third time I go to particular chapters to reread. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
and she talks about her journey with cancer. Um,
Mhm.
but it's just a beautiful, I really like memoirs. There's a theme
Me
here,
too.
memoirs
Me
and
too.
documentaries.
Yeah, yeah. No, I am the same. I love just real life is fascinating enough.
Mhm.
um, and then we already talked about the mantras, and the last question for this part is this is a hard one. You kind of answered it in various ways, but what does it mean to you to live a good life and thrive with rheumatic disease?
Focusing on the present moment in time and taking one day at a time, I think has been the biggest thing for me because I can't control the future, at least not all of it. And I don't know what lies in the future. I wish I had that superpower, but I don't. And I don't want to
Mhm.
look, past is the past for a reason. I think we can learn from the
Mhm.
past, right? There's wisdom of past experience, but I think also that's the wisdom of yoga is to be in the present moment as well.
Yeah.
And so um, I try to be in the present moment because that's what I can, and sometimes that's all I can manage too, Cheryl, is
Yeah. Yeah.
what is present with me right now? What is it that I need in this
Right.
moment, right? To get me to that next step. And to me, sometimes
Mhm.
that's either all I have the capacity for, right? Is just that. Because sometimes just
Mhm.
cooking a meal can be like take all my energy out
Yeah.
and then I'm like, I'm done, throw in the towel. But yeah, I think
Mhm.
that for me, it's just being in the present moment. Um, and yeah, and along with that is, it helps me also in that present moment cultivate happiness. And there are small things that can do that for me, like seeing a cute corgi walking or seeing a child having an
Mhm.
interaction with their parent that's so sweet. I had once just walking along the Embarcadero one day, a child, I don't know, he was about maybe like under 10 years old. He came up to me and wanted to dance battle just randomly. He put his like radio to the side and I was like frozen. It was like a dream come true, but I wasn't ready for it in that moment because he
Yeah.
caught
Yeah.
me off guard and I wasn't ready for it. But it was just such a sweet, like that right there, that child didn't even know what kind of impact they had on me in that moment, that till this day
Yeah, yeah.
I still share that moment. And it just made me smile deeply on the inside. And his mother was there, and she just like shrugged her shoulders like, you're the lucky one he chose. And I'm like, you
That's
won. I
so
was just
sweet.
like, you won this battle. I couldn't even like
Yeah.
comprehend. So it's like that's when I say where I cultivate my happiness too, it's like also being out and about. If I'm on a walk or if I'm in the park,
Mm-hmm.
just with the sun, because that as we all know, our joints love that natural sunlight. And I'm just watching just
Mm-hmm.
other people interact. That also gives me so much joy, especially if it's a human connection two people are having, or just dogs just living their best life, whether they're getting messy and just don't care. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
those
yeah.
are the things that like make me happy. Like if it
I
for whatever
love it.
reason, like I can't pull it for myself, well, then I'll go out in the world, and then I get gifted just from other people how they're cultivating their happiness and joy.
I love that. I mean, my therapist literally said, like, take or recommended I take inspiration from dogs, like, in terms of dogs live in the present moment. They're just, this is the moment I'm in. I am here. And they're, I mean, maybe they think about the future if they look at where their treats are or something, but it's not very far future that they're living in. They're definitely present. So I love that. Is there anything else you wanted to share with the listeners before we wrap up? I feel like we could talk all day, but I also want to be respectful of your time.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point to leave on. I hope that for those of you who are whether newly diagnosed or wherever you're at on with your journey to RA, that you can just be in the present and just take one day at a time with what you're holding, what you're navigating through. Um I feel like that's wisdom I had wished I had someone would have told me much sooner, because it's
Mm-hmm.
because now I know not to like Google every single thing, because then I just like go into a rabbit hole and then just can like
Mm-hmm.
think of the like, oh my gosh, is this kind of the worst? Is this what's going to happen? Or, I try not to do that. And so
Yeah.
just stay present, I think is what has helped me and my nervous system is to be in the
Mm-hmm.
now.
Mm-hmm. It's it's huge. It sounds so simple, and yet it is so difficult to do. So I think that's a really wonderful point to end on. And I just want to reiterate what I said earlier. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your story, for the first time in a forum that's going to be more of a public forum. And I'm very honored that you chose the Arthritis Life podcast to do that on.
Thank you,
And
Cheryl.
you yeah, I just love all the points that we touched on, and I appreciate you. And if people want to follow you on Instagram, I have put your Instagram handle in the show notes. But SMD Montoya, right?
Yes.
So hopefully people will connect with you there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, everyone.
We'll talk. Thank you. Talk to you later. Bye bye for now.
Bye.